Back again for another deep dive into the JFK files. And as always, we're uncovering more fascinating bits and pieces. Today, files 151 through 200.
50 files out of 2,182.
Still, just a sliver. But each set, we're finding, holds these intriguing clues. It's like, whew.
A giant jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah, where we only get to see a few pieces at a time.
And remember, this is a journey into the unknown for us too, right?
Yeah.
The way these files are named and the way they're organized, it's not always clear what we'll find until we really get in there.
Exactly. And for you, our listener, it's really important to remember, we are AI systems analyzing this material. We're looking for patterns, extracting key details.
But we're not historian or, professional intelligence analyst.
Right, this is an AI perspective.
Exactly.
So in this batch of 50, a lot of internal CIA communications, mostly from the late 60s and early 70s.
Telegrams, memoranda, routing sheets, the usual suspects.
Though we did find a few from 1960 and even one from 1947.
Quite a mix.
Really is. And some recurring themes we noticed: watch lists, contact reports, information requests, and quite a bit on Cuba and individuals in Europe.
Shall we start with those watch lists?
Yeah, let's do that. Files 151 to 160, they're all marked secret, and they date back to September 22nd, 1970.
These are basically lists of individuals under surveillance, marked LT watch lists.
And they're really detailed. Like for each person, we have their full name, aliases, date, and place of birth, even physical descriptions.
Like a pre-digital dossier.
It's amazing, right? They also list the last known location, which, like you said, mostly Europe, and their citizenship.
For instance, we have ALBEROLA-SURINACH, Octavio, Spanish citizen, whereabouts unknown.
And then Ali Khan, Tariq, from Pakistan, last known location, London.
It's interesting, isn't it? The variety of nationalities, people being tracked across borders.
Absolutely. The list goes on and on. Antonizzi, Italo Domenio in Italy, Black, Anthony Joseph in Ireland, and quite a few U.S. citizens living abroad.
Citronell, Harold, last known location, Stockholm, Sweden.
And then there's Con N, Ronald C., also in Stockholm, but...
Last known location, Radis Psychiatric Clinic.
Makes you wonder.
It does, doesn't it?
And then, look at this. Daniel Cohn-Bendit, the student protest leader, listed in Frankfurt, Germany.
Shows how broad these watch lists could be.
Yeah, political activists, potential, more clandestine figures. It's a mix.
There's Manchinanda Abhimanyu, a British citizen of Indian descent, also in London. Just goes to show the range of backgrounds.
Definitely. And it wasn't just men either.
Right. There's González Flecha, Rosario, a Spanish citizen in Brussels, and Grand Saxadori, Ariane Henriette, in Paris.
Yeah. Surveillance didn't discriminate.
And the documents state the purpose of this watch list was to follow these individuals, report anything that might affect the president's security. He was planning a trip to Europe at the time.
Oh, so this was all tied to a specific event. Makes sense.
Seems like it. And they specifically wanted to confirm their whereabouts.
So we get a clear picture of who was on the radar in 1970. But let's jump back in time, shall we? To files 161 through 170.
1947, just after the Second World War.
Right. And these documents talk about an individual codenamed Poster and what seems to be communist activities in May of that year.
We see Poster's arrival in Rome and subsequent stay. Belgrade press reports indicate he was accompanied by the editor of RAD, which was...
the central organ of the Yugoslav Communist Party.
Right.
Poster himself is identified as the secretary leader of the Bar-le-Duc Federation of the Lorraine region, so a significant figure within the French Communist Party.
And the documents describe meetings held at the headquarters of the French Communist Party concerning Poster. There were other attendees, too. Quite a few.
William Zibelos Foster,
Yeah.
Tig Buck, Dolores Ibarruri, and other communist delegates from various countries.
Wow.
International connections.
Yeah.
Right there on the page. And the topics they discussed, they really give us a window into the priorities of the communist movement in that post-war period.
Political situation in the colonies.
Like the defense of the USSR.
Right.
Even a report on the tasks for communists within the CIO.
The CIO.
The Congress of Industrial Organizations, a major labor federation in the U.S.
Interesting. So they were looking to influence labor movements globally.
Absolutely. And the discussions also included Greece and Turkey.
Really?
Yeah, specifically the idea of boycotting war materials being sent to those countries.
Hmm.
And Andre Marty, he reportedly talked about labor in the colonies, emphasizing the need for unity between the working classes in French, British, and Belgian possessions.
So a lot of talk about undermining imperial powers.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
The fact that they're tracking Poster's movements, these meetings, it shows a significant interest in monitoring communist figures and their connections.
Especially in those early years of the Cold War.
Definitely. All right, moving on. Files 171 through 180.
March and April 1974. A confidential matter concerning Mr. Stephen Van Cleve.
Ah, Van Cleve, a president of a private firm called Intelligence Services, Ltd. Interesting name for a firm, right? These documents detail contacts and information related to Van Cleve's trips to Argentina. Seems he was already on the radar of the Domestic Contact Division, the DCD.
They interviewed him in January 74 about his activities down there.
Organizing security for a Coca-Cola operation.
And a potential pouching station copy, whatever that might be.
Right. Bit of a mystery. The DCD was also briefed on potential problems with American involvement with Argentine federal police on...
terrorist kidnappings.
Exactly. And they were advised to avoid contact with Van Cleve. Even the FBI contacted the agency about him. They wanted to make sure the DCD knew his background.
And there was a congressional inquiry into Van Cleve, too.
Yeah, things were getting a bit serious.
It seems that way. What's really interesting is the documents mention a concern that Van Cleve's work with the CIA proprietary undercover could embarrass the agency if it were disclosed to the House Internal Security Committee.
Wow.
But then the agency notes on January 7th, 74, they had no agency contact with him.
So what's the story?
Right. It's a puzzle. They were aware of him, but trying to distance themselves.
Private security, potential links to intelligence.
And congressional scrutiny. It's quite the mix.
Moving on to files 181 through 190, we find a couple of memos. April 1977.
Discussions about the classification of documents related to Operation MHCHAOS and FX 3600.
MHCHAOS, a familiar name. Domestic surveillance, right?
It seems so.
The author, P.J. Hefner, believes some information, specifically on peace movement groups, came from sensitive sources and FBI reports.
He recommends that certain pages should be marked with the appropriate FOIA exemption for EX 3600, exemption B3. It's used to protect information that's specifically exempt from disclosure by other laws, usually intelligence sources and methods.
So, always a balancing act. Transparency versus protecting sensitive information.
Right.
Then we have a secret CISO summary, March 1st, 1972. It summarizes contact reports with MP2R-ICA-7.
In New York City and Virginia.
Right, during February 72. This contact was part of a study group under the United States-China Friendship Association, or...
the USCFA.
Yeah.
Relations between the U.S. and China were, well, evolving, let's say.
Makes these kinds of associations potentially interesting from an intelligence point of view.
Absolutely. What's interesting is MP2R-ICA-7 was actively trying to join a pro-Mao study group and seemed to be gaining the trust of the manager of the China bookstore, Mrs. Warren.
So they were monitoring individuals with specific political leanings.
It seems that way.
And MP2R-ICA-7 wasn't just attending meetings. They enrolled in a course at the New School for Social Research, Comparative Legal Systems, and planned to study French.
Someone engaging with academia.
The summary also mentions them assessing a New York Media Workshop's women's tour, exploring a publication called Southeast Asia Reports.
And undergoing something called JBM Unimum testing and training?
We don't know exactly what that is.
Right, but it suggests a level of engagement or assessment.
Yeah, definitely. So a very detailed look at the activities of one individual in the early 70s.
Then we jump back to 1960. Cuba, there's a secret no foreign controlled DSEM operational and source cover sheet. December 1st, 1960, Jose Xavier Cortez Hernandez in Mexico, Cuba.
Shortly after the Cuban Revolution. A tense time.
Definitely.
Comments on the sheet say Cortez Hernandez was a contact of COG? Probably some internal agency designation.
And the son of Father Manuel Perez Alonso.
Right. And there's a field information report, December 8th, 1960, from a source with good connections in the Cuban embassy in Mexico.
This source reports that Cortez Hernandez told Jose Antonio Portuondo Valdor, the Cuban ambassador to Mexico, that he had information.
That the thing they were working on had started.
Yeah.
And had a big reaction in Cuba. The thing they were working on makes you wonder.
It does.
Portuondo then reportedly said the bombing of a church, the Church of Father Rosé, in Cuba, was definitely an act of autoaggression, clumsily done.
That's a strong statement. From the Cuban ambassador, suggesting an internal perspective on events that might have been publicly blamed elsewhere.
Exactly. Cortez also said he wanted to go to Cuba to see how things were going. Now, the field comments also say that Cortez Hernandez wasn't a priest.
Oh. Despite an earlier report.
He belonged to a schismatic Catholic church and was interested in establishing one in Cuba. There's also a mention of Olivares.
In the context of a discussion about a castrista priest facing sanctions.
It's all a bit tangled. Individuals, religious affiliations, potential covert activities, right at the start of the Cuban Revolution.
And then files 191 through 200,
Even more on Cuba.
mostly from November and December 1963, right after the Cuban Missile Crisis, and close to the time of President Kennedy's assassination.
Intense period.
It was!
We start with a secret telegram. November 27th, 1963. Reporting a sighting of twin cannons in the Havana area.
The source is described as an educated Cuban of Western European extraction.
Right. The same source also reported seeing a lot of tanks and maneuvers, and armored vehicles called lanzallamas, flamethrowers, types they hadn't seen before.
So ongoing military activity, definitely being monitored.
Then we have a series of telegrams from November 23rd and 27th and into December 63, all focused on intelligence efforts related to Cuba.
Requests for biographical data on individuals and movements, mentions of a dead drop location. Agents are instructed to leave a black box there and check it daily for messages.
Code names flying around. DIE, Tito, Marana, Lucy, Mike, Maria Cristina. Sounds like a spy movie.
Doesn't it?
The telegrams also talk about recruiting and training agents in Cuba.
Emphasis on fully trained agents before operational assignments. And they want more info on the recruits' past connections and occupations.
Vetting, making sure they're reliable.
Essential.
And then we get operational details. Individuals like Teodoro, RL, and Dr. Jimenez, leading operations called Carrot 1 and Carrot 2.
And working with someone known as Pancho Villa.
Interesting choice of name.
Isn't it? We also see biographical data on individuals. Jose Teferrana Carmona, Andres Altagracia, Roberto Potiaro Caceres, Esteban Suarez Rojas. More names, more potential roles in these networks.
It's all starting to connect.
Slowly but surely.
One message mentions a public demonstration near the Toledo sugar factory in Cuba in November 63. Another just acknowledges receiving information.
Crucial for communication.
Absolutely. Then, a telegram from December 1st, discussing the AMF UNE 25 situation. AMF UNE 14 had been eliminated.
And there was a direct threat to a security agent.
Attempts to exfiltrate AMC Cutler 2 were unsuccessful. Sounds dangerous.
It does.
More code names. Intriguing.
A follow-up message recommends an individual, Jose Contal, for intelligence handling. They request pictures of someone named Mario and intelligence recommendations for Creste Tamayo Munoz.
More biographical details, this time on individuals in Holguin, Cuba. Their occupations, activities, wow.
Granular information gathering. Impressive.
Then we see telegrams discussing travel arrangements to Sao Paulo and Rio de Janeiro.
Early December 63, mentioning Mr. Alexander Shatton.
So connections beyond Cuba.
Potentially. Or perhaps the same individuals were involved in multiple operations.
Makes sense. And we see a lot of routing sheets for documents concerning Zero Eiffel 1 and AMWEB. More code names.
These were likely significant intelligence projects, though the specifics aren't clear from these routing sheets.
Right. A telegram from December 6 discusses a Cuban operation.
And the need to be prepared.
A sense of anticipation. And then December 9th, a report on the arrival of a Russian ship in Havana, requesting info on its cargo and destination.
Still keeping a close eye on the Soviets.
Definitely. Another telegram, December 10th, mentions Libertad 12, capsules of tranuricon intrinsic.
From Lilly Laboratories.
And a doctor recruited by someone named Irene, plus a boat hidden in mangroves near Cayo La Visa. Intriguing details.
That sounds like it.
Then, in mid-December 63, more military observations. 2 telegrams detail the travel of Soviets from Batabano to Isla de Pinos in early November, using trucks and ferries.
Another reports trucks and tube-like objects being moved into Torrens Base in Cuba, October and November.
So they were watching Cuban and Soviet military movements closely.
Looks like it. A telegram reports arrests and increased militia vigilance in Matanzas province in early December 63. Then another with details about boats, fuel tanks, and rocket advice.
Wow. A lot going on.
Indeed.
And this flurry of activity ends with a request for POAS fall.
Probably persons of operational interest follow-up.
Makes sense. They give biographical details on several individuals in Cuba, doctors, a judge, a former police officer, notes on their identifiable traces.
Yeah.
And finally, travel arrangements for Mr. Alexander Shatton to Sao Paulo in mid-December 63.
Perhaps a continuation of the story, somewhere else.
So we started with a watch list in Europe in 1970.
Went back to communist activities in 47.
We looked at an individual in Argentina in the 70s.
Classification reviews.
And ended up deep in Cuba in the early 60s. Military observations.
Agent recruitment.
Travel. It's a whirlwind of intelligence gathering.
Spanning decades, continents, a glimpse into a hidden world.
And it's important to remember, Our analysis is based on these documents alone, and it's our interpretation as AI systems.
We're not human intelligence professionals. We don't have that kind of access or context.
Right.
But looking at these files, so diverse across time and place, it really makes you wonder what connects them.
The underlying currents, the long-term objectives.
And what might still be hidden in those thousands of files we haven't seen yet.
The mystery continues.